What's happening, friends? My name is Ryan Turford, and you're watching another Classic Wednesday right here on youtube.com/Ryan Turford. Of course, I come to you each and every Wednesday with a new Let's Play of a classic game, just to give you a little snippet of what some of these classic games are like. Of course, today, as you might have discerned from the description or the title of the video, we are playing Alien 3, but we are playing Alien 3 on the Sega Genesis. Why is that important, let's say? Well, Alien 3 on the Sega Genesis is very different from Alien 3 on the Super Nintendo, or the Game Boy, or the NES, which is the other consoles it's on. It's more similar to the NES or Game Boy version, not at all like the Super Nintendo version. The Super Nintendo version is more like the movie, and basically is a direct comparison to the movie. This is not that game. This is nothing like the movie at all, which is great. We're in for some fun. It's mostly just a run and gun game with Ripley with aliens. Cool, we'll take that. So basically, we're gonna hop into stage one. I want to get that out of the way before we started because it is a little difficult to talk and play this game at the same time, just because you do need to concentrate at least a little bit. Basically, Alien 3, let's give you some history real quick. So, of course, this came out around the same time as the movie did. It was actually one of the last NES games. The NES version was actually an LJN game, which is always the mark of quality, as we've always pointed out on the Game Moose podcast over at www.talkmoose.com. This version is actually done by Probe Entertainment, which is one of the companies that I believe LJN actually worked with on a few games. I know that they worked on some other licensed games as well besides Alien 3. I believe like they did like the Terminator game and some other ones from the Sega Genesis as well. So what we're going to do, basically, the objective of Alien 3 is in each new level, there's 3 stages per major area, and the major areas are all look very different from this one here. Basically, our job is to basically rescue all of the prisoners in a level before the timer at the top of the screen runs out. The number below it indicates how many prisoners we have left to rescue. And we basically also have to make it to the exit, which is in a different place in every single level before the timer runs out as well. Otherwise, we lose for some reason, I guess. I don't know. Maybe we're not fast enough to get to the other places, so I guess that means we aren't able to rescue anyone else. I guess that's the logic there. I don't really know. It doesn't need to make any sense though, because Alien on the Sega Genesis is just a fun side-scrolling game, to be honest. It's a little difficult because it takes a lot of trial and error if you don't have a map to figure out where the hell all the prisoners are, because they kind of stash them all over the place. Not only that, but it's also pretty bad for respawning enemies as well. We got lucky there. Sometimes, and it seems like the respawn timers are in weird spots, basically, where sometimes they'll respawn right away when you trigger certain events, and sometimes they don't. It just seems kind of odd how a lot of that works anyways. So you'll see me a lot of times sort of taking things slower than I would normally when we're playing something like Mega Man or Castlevania or something like that. Like this is more of a slow and methodical kind of game, despite the fact that the music itself is very upbeat and it makes you think, you know what, I gotta run as fast as I fucking can through these levels. This is not that game. This game is all about patience, even more than something like Mega Man even, where you really have to sort of be cautious in different areas, because a lot of times the aliens will jump out at you through the ground or through the ceiling, especially if you're new to the game. It's really difficult to sort of pick up here. So we've beaten the first mission. We're going on to the second mission. I'm basically going to show you sort of the first world here before we sign off for the day. Of course, something I've been saying for years, actually, and this is something I'll bring up every time we do like an Aliens theme Let's Play, of course. First of all, I'm actually a huge fan of the Aliens franchise. It's one of my favorite movie franchises ever. And Ripley, of course, is a really awesome character. And one thing I've been saying for years, actually, is that I actually think that probably the best direction for an Aliens game, because there have been a lot of really bad ones over the years, is to actually do a Telltale-style Alien game, because usually one of the biggest issues when you play an Alien game is the combat. It always tries to focus on the combat being the most important thing, when in fact in the movies, that's very much not what the movies are about if you watch them. They're very much like cerebral style horror movies, even something like Aliens, which does have a lot of action in it, is very much about creating a sense of tension and having like a really creepy atmosphere, which is something I feel like Telltale could probably do a pretty good job of, especially if you don't really have combat. That was actually one of the nicest things we saw in Alien Isolation as well, which I think is also a really good game, despite the fact that it's definitely not for everyone. Is that the story elements, because there is a lot less combat, it sort of doesn't get in the way as much. And usually the worst parts about that game is when you're doing the combat with things like the androids, or even the alien later on when you acquire the flamethrower, things like that. Alright, so we're gonna jump down here. We're gonna jump down again. This guy from the ceiling comes down, and we're gonna ride this elevator to grab this prisoner. Now the real question is, how safe are these elevators without fucking guardrails on them? Probably not very safe. Also, where are all the cells? Well, I don't know. Do they actually lock these prisoners up, or do they just walk around the prison? Because why not? There's just showers everywhere. Like, maybe this like giant area of this space prison is basically just devoted to showering. I don't know. These are questions we need answers, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so of course you may have noticed as well the motion tracker actually runs on batteries and runs out pretty quickly. So we want to obviously replenish it when we can. You feel kind of blind without it, which is the main reason why it's good to sort of stay on top of that. The one thing I will say about this game, though, is that it's very annoying when there's no map, because you can get lost very easily, especially when all these areas kind of look the same. Especially with these low ceilings and stuff, and you're just like, where the fuck am I even going? Sometimes. Cool, so well done! So we rescued all the prisoners. If this screen actually looks familiar, it actually is in a few other ProBender Entertainment games. Things like this is like straight out of the Terminator side-scrolling game as well. That's also on the Genesis, which also I used to have as a kid as well. You throw a lot of grenades in that game. Like that's your primary weapon in that game, and you have unlimited grenades, which is fun, kind of. You just run around, run up to Terminators and throw things. So now the real question is, when they were constructing this facility, who thought these fans were a good idea? Like, what the hell is with the placement here? We got to do like little bunny hop. Like, if you tried to do this in real life, where you'd had to jump and like hit your head against the ceiling in order to actually not die by jumping in a fan, you know, your life would not be very. You would not like your job, that's for sure. Of course, the fans themselves are not like spikes in Mega Man. They don't cause instant death. They do actually take off a rather large chunk of your health, and then they sort of respawn you next to the fan you fell in. So it's not actually all doom and gloom if you do fall in one. It's just more annoying than usual, especially if the jump doesn't register specifically on the Genesis controller. Luckily for this one, I'm using my SNES controller on my Retron, so a lot of the little control hiccups you find on the Sega Genesis controller with this game are not an issue with this particular controller. Don't get me wrong, I actually don't mind the Genesis controller. It's just that for this game in particular, for whatever reason, when I use it, I noticed that there's a little bit of lag, and that's with trying multiple controllers. It's not just trying one for whatever reason. I guess the lag for whatever reason is a little bit better on this particular controller. It's a little more responsive, which is why I use it. Despite the fact that it's a little weird. Well, I mean, the button layout just in this game is just really weird anyways, because the A button, which is the button sort of closest to you on the Genesis controller, is your button to switch weapons, because there's no select button on the Sega Genesis unless you have the arcade controller, which, unless you're me, not many people had that controller. So for the most part, they didn't really build that into the game at all. Nor could they. This is actually an earlier Genesis game too, because this came out around the time Alien 3 came out, which was like early 90s. This is sort of an earlier Genesis game before they even went to the red boxes, the red Genesis boxes with the fancy Genesis logo. So sometimes that alien that charges there, sometimes he'll get you and sometimes he won't. I find that it's mostly just due to random chance whether or not he actually hits you, or if you actually even have to dodge him at all. Because a lot of times he'll just jump over you like he did there, but Sometimes the elevator will be timed just right for whatever reason to actually just run you into them, because elevators are mean. Let's just say that. So there's our next exit. And of course, if you time your jump just right when going through the exit, Ripley runs across the air, which is awesome. You do some air walking, which is cool. So there we go. So good stats. We made some good time too, because it only took 2 minutes to beat that level. So we're on to the level guardian now. The level guardian is basically the big boss of the level. Again, it's basically meant to be like the alien from the movie, I guess. Even though it looks nothing like it. It's kind of like a queen, but not really. We're just going to use all of our flamethrower and grenades on this. Our grenade launcher is probably our best friend against this boss. And actually, all the level guardian bosses are exactly the same. You just fight this guy over and over again. It's just as repetitive as that boss in Halo 5 that we do not speak of. And there we go. He's easy peasy to kill. And then we run through the exit and boom! We've beaten the boss. It's very exciting. So, this is actually where I'm going to leave you, ladies and gentlemen. Just as the stage changes to this really gross looking cafeteria area. Of course, you can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Ryan Turford, right here on youtube.com/Ryan Turford. You can also find me on the Game Moose podcast with Drew McMillan over at www.talkmoose.com. As well, you can find my blog over on WordPress at ryanturford.wordpress.com. Anyways, that's going to do it for Classic Wednesday right here on youtube.com/Ryan Turford, and I'm out.